The autumn wind swept across the fields of Kansas in the year 1883, carrying with it the smell of dust and the sound of leaves that cracked beneath tired boots. In the parlor of the Whitmore home, Clara Hayes stood with her hands clutched around the handle of a small carpetbag. Her stepmother's voice cut sharp through the room, colder than the draft that slipped beneath the door. "You will go, Clara," she said, "and you will go today." Clara's heart thudded heavy inside her chest. She had read the letter many times, the one meant for her younger sister Eloise, who was 17. The man who wrote it had asked for Eloise, not her. Her stepmother's lips pressed thin. "Do you think I would send a girl of 17 into the arms of a widower in Montana with a child at his side and nothing but a ranch for a home? You are older, stronger, more practical. That is your place." Clara swallowed hard, the words scratching in her throat like thorns. She looked toward the stairs, hoping to see her sister descend, hoping to see her object, but Eloise remained upstairs, silent as stone. Clara had known all her life that Eloise was the favored one, the daughter with golden hair and a soft laugh, the one who drew smiles from strangers. Clara had always been the shadow, the one asked to clean, to carry, to sacrifice. Still, the silence from her sister's room ached deeper than she expected. Her stepmother held out the folded letter, with its neat, steady handwriting. Ethan McAllister, 36, widower, father to a 9-year-old boy. His words had been plain and without flourish. "I can offer honesty, a roof, and kindness." Clara had read that line until she could see it behind her eyelids. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe a man like that might exist. But her stepmother's next words broke whatever hope she had begun to stitch together. "Stay here, and you will scrub floors until your back breaks. Go there, and perhaps you will have a roof to call your own." Clara's hand shook as she took the letter. She pressed it against her chest, not because she accepted her fate, but because it was the only thing she owned that held the promise of something better. She kissed Eloise's cheek when her sister finally appeared in the hallway, though Eloise's lips did not part to speak. Then, with tears blurring her eyes, Clara walked to the waiting stagecoach. The wheels groaned as the driver snapped the reins. Dust rose and swallowed the house she had known, the only home that had never welcomed her. The road stretched wide, leading west toward a life she had not chosen. Clara leaned her head against the hard wooden frame, clutching the letter under her coat. She whispered into the chill air, "Please let him be decent. Please let the child be kind. Please let this not be the end of me." And with the clatter of hooves and the cry of the prairie wind, her life as Clara Hayes was left behind, and the life of a bride under another's name had begun. The road stretched across the plains like a ribbon of dust, and the stagecoach rattled with every stone and rut beneath its wheels. Clara sat pressed against the side, her bag tucked tight against her legs, the letter hidden beneath her coat where she could feel it against her heart. Each turn of the wheels carried her farther from the place she had called home, though that house had never truly been a home to her. The wind came through the cracks in the coach, sharp and cold, biting at her cheeks and tugging loose strands of her dark hair. She pulled the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, wishing for a warmth that never came. The other passengers kept mostly to themselves. A mother with 2 small children tried to hush their cries as they grew restless. A man in a frayed hat dozed with his arms crossed, his chin bobbing with the jolts of the coach. Across from Clara sat an older woman who spoke little but clutched a small Bible in her lap, her lips moving in silent prayer each time the wheels dipped hard into a hole. Clara listened to the creak of the wood and the steady beat of hooves, sounds that marked the passage of miles she could not count. At night, the driver stopped at way stations where thin meals were served and hard beds were offered, though most nights Clara could hardly sleep. She would lie awake on a straw mattress, the chill creeping through the boards beneath her, the smell of smoke and sweat filling her lungs. Each time her eyes closed, she saw the letter, the words written in a hand both plain and strong. "I can offer honesty, a roof, and kindness." She whispered the words to herself as though they were a prayer. She tried to picture the man who had written them, though the image shifted with every mile, sometimes stern, sometimes gentle, sometimes nothing but a shadow. The journey felt endless, the horizon always stretching farther than her eyes could see. The land changed slowly, the wide plains giving way to rolling hills, then to jagged ridges where the air grew thinner and sharper. Her body ached from the constant jostle. Her stomach turned from the dust that clung to every corner of the coach. Still, she held on, gripping the folded paper like a lifeline. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in streaks of fire, Clara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and watched the light fade behind the hills. She thought of Eloise in the warm parlor back home, of her laughter that drew men's eyes, and her beauty that won her favor. Clara felt the sting of betrayal, yet she could not hate her sister. Eloise had not forced her into the coach. That had been Miriam, with her cold words and sharper hands. Clara sighed, her breath fogging the glass. She whispered again into the darkening air, "Please let him be decent. Please let his child be kind." The coach jolted forward, carrying her deeper into the unknown, and Clara closed her eyes, clutching the letter as though it were the only compass she had left. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in the pale light of late afternoon. The sound of hissing brakes and stamping hooves pulling Clara from her weary thought. Her bones ached from the long ride, her head still heavy with the rhythm of wheels and rattling boards. She pressed her hand over her heart, where the letter rested beneath her coat, then stepped down onto the packed earth. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, and the hills around her glowed with the last light of the Sunday. She had prepared herself for ruin, for a shack leaning against the wind, for fences falling, and a house barely fit to stand. Instead, her eyes widened, and she froze where she stood. Before her was a wide log house, its walls straight and solid, the shutters painted a gentle green. Herbs hung drying along the porch rail, and smoke curled from a chimney that carried the smell of stew. Beside the house stood a barn, with doors closed tight and fences mended, chickens scratching in the dirt as though nothing in the world could harm them. It was not the image of failure she had feared, but of life, steady and strong. Clara swallowed hard, a strange relief rising with her fear. A man walked from the barnyard, rolling down his sleeves. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his skin darkened by years of sun, his stride unhurried and sure. His hair was brown, his jaw square, his eyes a clear, steady blue that fixed on her with a calmness that unsettled her. He removed his hat and held it at his side. "You must be Miss Hayes," he said. The name Eloise caught in her throat, but she forced a nod. "Yes." His mouth lifted in the faintest smile, as if he were pleased, but too modest to show it. "You are early," he said. "That is a good sign." From the doorway of the house a small figure appeared, a little boy no more than 9. His hair was a lighter shade of brown, his face freckled, his eyes curious and wary. He peeked out, then tucked himself half behind the man's leg. "This is Daniel," the man said. "He is shy, but he has a good heart." Clara's chest tightened at the sight of the boy. His small hand gripped his father's trouser, his eyes fixed on her with the kind of hope that made her knees weak. The man stepped closer, his hand reaching for her bag. "May I?" he asked gently. Their fingers brushed, a small touch that warmed her skin and sent a shameful shiver through her, for she was not the woman he believed her to be. She lowered her eyes, her voice thin. "Thank you." He lifted the bag with ease, as though it weighed nothing, and gestured toward the house. "Supper is ready. Rabbit stew. Come inside." Clara followed him up the porch steps, her shoes heavy with dust, her heart trembling with each beat. The door opened to warmth and the smell of thyme and fresh bread. Firelight flickered across polished wood. A rocking chair swayed gently as though recently used. She paused on the threshold, her eyes burning with sudden tears. She had expected to walk into sorrow and ruin, yet she stepped instead into a home alive, steady, and terrifyingly real. Clara stepped across the threshold with her heart pounding so loud she feared the man beside her might hear it. The warmth of the house wrapped around her at once, carrying the scent of rabbit stew and fresh baked bread. The glow of the fire in the hearth threw soft light across the wooden floor and the quilt draped over the back of a chair. It was not grand, not the sort of house where she had once dreamed of living, but it felt steady, cared for, and it struck her with a force she could not name. Ethan set her bag down near the stairs, then motioned toward the table. The boards were worn smooth, with years of use, but everything upon it was neat. The pot of stew steaming, the bread laid out on a small plate, 2 bowls already set beside a third that was smaller, waiting for the boy. Clara hesitated at the edge of the room, her hands knotted together, but Ethan pulled out a chair for her with a quiet courtesy that made her throat ache. "Please," he said. "It has been a long ride." She sat slowly, her fingers trembling against the edge of the table. Daniel slid into the chair across from her, his chin barely reaching the top, his wide eyes fixed on her as though he were trying to see past her skin into her very soul. He did not speak, only fiddled with the wooden spoon before him, and Clara found herself wanting to reach across, to smooth the hair that had fallen across his brow, though she dared not. Ethan ladled the stew into each bowl, his movements steady, unhurried. The steam curled into the air, carrying the smell of thyme and onion, rich and comforting. He set a bowl before Clara and gave her a piece of bread, then finally sat himself, bowing his head in a moment of silent prayer before lifting his spoon. Clara followed, though no words passed her lips, only a quiet plea that she might survive this new life without being found out. The first bite nearly undid her. It was warm and filling, far better than the dry bread and weak broth she had eaten at way stations along the road. She swallowed slowly, the taste mingling with the sudden rush of tears that stung her eyes. Ethan did not stare or question her. He only ate in silence, glancing toward his son now and again, and that silence was a gift. She had expected questions, demands, a man eager for what he believed he had purchased. Yet instead she found herself given space, as if her comfort mattered more than her duties. Daniel finally spoke, his voice so soft Clara nearly missed it. "Do you like dolls?" he asked, his eyes darting toward hers before slipping away. Clara blinked at him, startled. "Yes," she said gently. "I liked them very much when I was small." His lips curved almost into a smile before he hid it by dipping his spoon into the stew. Ethan gave the boy a quiet nod, as if to say that was enough. When the meal ended, Ethan cleared the bowls himself and fetched a small pot from the stove. He poured hot liquid into 2 cups and slid one toward Clara. "Chamomile," he explained, "helps with travel weariness." She cupped the warm clay between her palms, the heat sinking into her chilled fingers, and for a moment she felt something she had not known in years. Tenderness, quiet and unspoken, given freely. Ethan rose then, motioning toward the stairs. "I thought you might want your own room," he said, "at least until you have settled." Clara looked up sharply, startled by the offer. Most men she had known would have demanded her obedience that very night. Yet he gave her time. "Respect," she managed to whisper. "Thank you." He inclined his head, then stood aside as she made her way up the narrow stairs. The quilt laid across the bed was folded neatly, the basin filled with fresh water, the curtains drawn against the chill night. Clara touched the edge of the quilt with trembling fingers, her throat thick with something she could not name. She had stepped into this house under a false name, certain she would be nothing more than a burden. Yet here she found kindness and care. And as she set the cup on the bedside table and lay down upon the straw mattress, the firelight from below flickering against the ceiling beams, Clara knew that the supper at the stranger's table had changed something inside her forever. The night air pressed against the shutters, whistling through small cracks as Clara lay awake in the narrow bed upstairs. She had thought the long journey would leave her too weary to think, yet her mind churned with unease. The warmth of the house surrounded her, the quilt tucked close against her chin, the faint glow of the fire below still flickering through the boards, but sleep would not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's steady gaze, heard the soft scrape of his spoon against the bowl, or felt the weight of the child's eyes watching her from across the table. She told herself she would never truly belong here, that one day the truth would surface, yet her heart betrayed her by longing for the impossible. It was well past midnight when Clara heard it, a faint creak upon the stairs, then soft footsteps across the floorboards. She sat up quickly, her breath caught tight in her throat. The door eased open with a slow groan, and there in the dim light of the dying lamp stood Daniel. His small figure was outlined against the dark, his hair mussed from sleep, his bare feet pattering softly as he entered the room. He held something clutched close to his chest. Clara's voice trembled when she spoke. "Daniel, is something wrong?" The boy shook his head, his eyes wide but solemn. He crossed the room without a word and set the object upon her bedside table. In the thin light, Clara could see it clearly. A small rag doll, its fabric worn soft with years of clutching, its button eyes loose but still holding. Her breath caught as she reached for it, her fingers brushing the faded cloth. "For me," she whispered. Daniel gave the smallest nod. "For you," he said, in a voice no louder than a whisper, then turned to go. Clara blinked rapidly, her throat aching as tears burned behind her eyes. Daniel had said little since she arrived, shy and quiet, careful with every word. Yet here he was, placing in her care something most precious to him, a doll carried through lonely nights and long days without a mother's touch. She lifted it gently, cradling it as though it might fall apart in her hands, and in that moment, she felt a warmth she had not known in all her years under her stepmother's roof. It was not a grand gift, but it was more valuable than any gown or jewel. It was trust, and it was given to her. When the door clicked shut and the boy's steps faded back down the hall, Clara pressed the doll to her chest and let the tears fall freely. She thought of how Miriam had cast her away, how Eloise had stayed silent, how she had been sent west as though her worth were no more than the fare for a coach ride. Yet here, in this house filled with quiet strength and careful kindness, a child had looked at her and seen something more. She wiped her cheeks with the edge of the quilt and whispered into the dark, "I will not let him down, not him and not his father." At last, she lay back upon the pillow, the doll still clutched in her arms. The storm of doubt inside her eased for the first time since she had left Kansas. Outside, the wind carried across the valley, rustling through the pine, but in her heart, a stillness grew. Sleep found her at last, gentle and deep, as though the rag doll itself carried the promise of belonging. The thaw of early spring came slowly to the valley, the snow melting in thin streams that wound through the fields and left the ground soft beneath boots. Clara rose each morning to the sound of roosters and the steady creak of the barn door as Ethan began his chores. She had never known such rhythm, the days unfolding in quiet tasks that seemed small, yet carried a weight she had not felt before. After breakfast, she followed him to the garden behind the barn, where the soil was dark and damp and waiting for new life. Ethan knelt with a small spade in his hand and showed her how to turn the earth. His movements were steady and sure, as if every stroke of the blade had been done 1,000 times before. Clara knelt beside him, pressing her hands into the soil. The dirt clung to her skin, cool and rich, and she felt the strange satisfaction of something real beneath her fingers. Ethan spoke in his calm voice, telling her where to plant squash, how to space beans so they would not choke one another, how to trim the berry bushes that curled along the fence. Clara listened carefully, though often her gaze drifted to his hands. They were rough, scarred from years of labor, yet gentle when they touched the tender shoots that pushed from the ground. He never corrected her sharply, never scolded when she fumbled. Instead, he guided her, his patience steady as the sun that climbed across the sky. Each morning she returned to the garden, and slowly her fingers grew. Sure, her shoulders eased, her heart lighter with the knowledge that she could bring forth life from the soil. Daniel often followed them, lingering at the edge with his wooden horse in hand. He watched as Clara bent over the rows, her hair slipping loose from its pins, her laughter rising in surprise when a bird darted from the hedges. At first he stayed silent, but soon he began to bring her small treasures, a stone shaped like a heart, a feather he had found near the creek, a bunch of violets clutched tight in his fist. Clara tucked each gift into her apron pocket, her smile soft and full, and each time Daniel's eyes brightened, as though he had given her the world. Evenings were her favorite. Once the chores were done and Daniel tucked into bed, Clara and Ethan would sit on the porch. The valley stretched wide before them, the hills washed in the last gold light of the day. Sometimes they spoke of books or weather or the work yet to come, and sometimes they said nothing at all. The silence between them was not heavy, but alive, like the earth itself waiting for seed. Clara felt herself drawn to it, to him, her heart beating with something she had not dared to name. One morning, after showing her how to set a row of seeds, Ethan brushed the dirt from his palms and looked at her with a faint smile. "You will have your own patch soon," he said, "whatever you want to grow." Clara laughed softly, her cheeks warming. "What if I am no good at it? Then we will grow weeds," he answered. "They are loyal." She laughed again, and the sound startled her, for it had been so long since laughter had come freely. Ethan's eyes lingered on her, something unreadable within them, and she turned quickly back to the soil, though her heart beat faster. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the quilt drawn up to her chin, Clara thought of his words and the soil beneath her hands. Roots had begun to take hold, not only in the garden, but in her heart, and she feared them and longed for them in equal measure. The morning began with the soft clatter of hooves outside the barn, and the low hum of Ethan's voice as he worked. Clara was sweeping the kitchen floor when he stepped inside, his coat still smelling faintly of hay and smoke. He paused a moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite read, then said quietly that they would be going into town that day. Clara lifted her head in surprise, the broom pausing in her hands. "For supplies?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, then nodded once, though there was more behind his eyes than he spoke aloud. "And for you," he added after a moment. The ride into town was brisk, the spring air carrying the scent of thawing earth and damp pine. Ethan's coat was wrapped around Clara's shoulders, the fabric far too large but warm all the same. Daniel rode ahead on his pony, his laughter carried by the wind as he urged the animal down the dirt road. Clara clutched the reins tightly, her stomach knotted with unease. She had come here under a false name, and every mile closer to town felt like a mile closer to discovery. Yet beside her, Ethan rode steady, his presence solid as the mountains in the distance. When they arrived, the people of the town greeted Ethan with nods and smiles. He returned each one with the quiet respect of a man known and trusted. Clara kept her eyes low, afraid of being seen too clearly. But even so, she could feel the warmth of the glances cast their way. The general store smelled of leather and grain, its shelves stacked with fabric, tools, and bolts of ribbon. Clara lingered at the doorway, but Ethan guided her inside with a firm hand at her elbow. He chose 2 dresses for her, one pale blue, the other golden like wheat in the Sunday. He added a sturdy pair of boots and a ribbon the color of cream. Clara's voice faltered as she whispered that he did not have to, that she had no right to such things. Ethan only shook his head. "You deserve more than one threadbare dress," he said softly. "If you are to be part of this family, you ought to feel as though you belong." His words lodged deep in her heart, dangerous and sweet, stirring a longing she tried hard to silence. At the jeweler's, the small bell above the door chimed as they entered. The shelves glittered with silver and gold, delicate chains and rings that caught the lamplight. Clara stood frozen, certain she had no place in such a shop, but Ethan walked straight to the counter. He chose a fine chain with a small carved poppy pendant. The jeweler explained it meant hope, hope born out of sorrow. Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes steady. "May I?" he asked. Her voice failed her, so she only nodded. He fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing lightly against her skin. The touch sent heat rushing to her cheeks, and she lowered her eyes, afraid he might see the truth of what she felt. She touched the pendant, impossibly light and impossibly heavy at once, and knew she would carry both its promise and its burden. That night, back at the ranch, Clara stood before the small mirror in her room. She wore the blue dress, the necklace resting against her collarbone. For a moment she did not recognize the woman looking back, yet she wished with all her heart she could be her. Guilt pressed heavy against her chest, but beneath it was something she could not deny, a fragile bloom of happiness that she feared and treasured all at once. The sky had turned gray with the weight of rain, the wind carrying the smell of a storm across the valley. Clara stood in the kitchen peeling potatoes for supper, her hands working steady though her thoughts drifted far. The necklace rested against her collarbone, a reminder of Ethan's kindness, of the way his fingers had brushed her skin when he fastened the clasp. Each time she touched it, she felt the sweetness of belonging, but guilt pressed heavy beneath the comfort. She had stepped into this house under a false name, and sooner or later that truth would come knocking. The knock came sooner than she dreamed. It was sharp and deliberate, echoing through the wooden beams of the house. Daniel looked up from where he sat at the table with his drawings, his small hand gripping the pencil tightly. Ethan wiped his hands on a cloth and moved toward the door, his shoulders squared in caution. Clara's breath caught as the hinges creaked and the door swung wide. Two figures stood upon the porch, their boots slick with mud, their faces marked with travel but not with weariness. At the front was a young woman with golden hair coiled in shining curls, her gown pale blue silk trimmed with ivory, far too fine for the dusty road she claimed to have traveled. A parasol rested in her hand, though the sky was heavy with rain. Behind her stood Martha, Clara's stepmother, her expression stiff and cold, her smile carrying no warmth. "Mr. McAllister," Martha said sweetly, her voice dripping with false courtesy, "I do hope you will forgive this intrusion. We have come a long way in search of a missing girl." Clara froze in the archway, the knife slipping slightly in her grasp. She knew those eyes, that smile that did not reach them. Eloise stepped forward, her skirts brushing the threshold, and lowered into a curtsy. "I am Eloise Hayes," she declared, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. "I fear you have been deceived." Ethan's brow furrowed, his gaze shifting toward Clara. His steady blue eyes searched hers, waiting for an answer. Clara's throat closed tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. Eloise pressed a gloved hand to her chest and continued. "She left home pretending to be me. She intercepted the letters, took what was mine, and I was sick with worry. I could not rest until I came to make this right." Clara stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling at her sides. The words came hollow but calm. "The letters were written in your name, that much is true, but I did not steal them. I was sent, forced, cast away as though I had no worth. Everything since I arrived, every word, every moment, has been mine and mine alone." Eloise's lips curved in a wounded smile. "She has always wanted what I had," she said to Ethan. "Dresses, affection, attention. I never thought she would take something this far. She has taken you, this home, this life meant for me." Daniel clung to Clara's skirt, his eyes wide with confusion. Ethan's gaze did not leave her, unreadable, steady as the mountains yet shadowed with doubt. Martha's voice cut sharp as a blade. "Liar," she spat. "By omission or not, you are a liar." Clara straightened her back, her voice steady, though her heart splintered. "She can have the letters, she can have the gowns, but she cannot have what I feel. That belongs to me." Her eyes flicked toward Ethan, aching for his belief. Yet silence pressed heavy in the room. The truth had come, and it had shattered the fragile peace she had built. The first drops of rain began to fall, as Clara gathered her shawl from the peg by the door, her fingers shaking as she pulled the fabric tight around her shoulders. The storm outside had been building all day, gray clouds rolling heavy across the hills, and now thunder rumbled close enough to make the windows tremble. Inside the house, the silence was louder than the storm. Ethan stood by the table, his jaw set, his hands pressed flat against the wood, as though holding himself still. Eloise lingered near the doorway, her parasol closed now, her blue silk gown shimmering faintly in the lamplight. Martha's sharp eyes glinted with victory. Daniel clung to Clara's skirts, his face pressed against the fabric, his small frame trembling. Clara bent down, her throat raw, as she whispered to him, "It is all right, sweetheart. You are never the lie." His arms wrapped tighter around her waist, his muffled sobs breaking her heart. She kissed the crown of his hair, breathing in the familiar scent of wood smoke and hay that clung to him, then gently pried his hands away. Her palms lingered against his cheeks, memorizing the shape of his little face, before she stood once more. Ethan's voice came then, quiet but cutting. "I trusted you," he said, his blue eyes fixed on her. Clara felt the words pierce deeper than any shout could have. "I never lied about how I felt," she answered, her voice steady, though her chest shook with sorrow. "But it changes nothing," Martha said sharply, her words like poison. "You deceived him, you played house, and now you have been found out." Clara nodded once, though her vision blurred with tears. "Then I will not burden you any longer," she said softly. She turned away before the sob in her throat could escape, gathering what few things she had: her small bag, her worn shawl, the rag doll Daniel had given her. With each step she felt her heart breaking, yet her pride held her head high. The door opened to the storm, the wind lashing rain against her face, soaking her dress within moments. She stepped down from the porch, the mud sucking at her boots, the sky splitting with thunder above. Behind her, Daniel cried out, his small voice tearing through the night. "Mama!" The word struck Clara's soul, but she did not turn. If she looked back, she would fall apart, and she could not bear to crumble before Martha's cold smile or Eloise's shining eyes. The rain poured harder, plastering her hair against her cheeks, her boots squelching with every step down the path. The bag grew heavier, the rag doll inside already damp. She pulled the shawl tighter, though it did little against the downpour. Her breath came in gasps, not from the storm, but from the weight pressing against her chest. Each step carried her farther from the only home where she had felt love, yet she forced herself forward. She reached the edge of the yard, the fence posts standing like silent sentinels in the rain. Her body ached, her spirit frayed, but she did not falter. Even if he no longer saw her, even if the truth had cast her out, she knew what she had lived. She had loved them, Ethan, with his quiet steadiness, Daniel with his fragile hope, and no storm could wash that truth away. The wind howled, tearing at her shawl, but Clara walked on, her head lifted high, a lone figure swallowed by the storm. The morning after Clara left, the house felt colder than the storm outside. The fire had burned down to faint embers, and even though Ethan had stoked it before dawn, the warmth seemed unwilling to return. Daniel sat silent at the table, his spoon untouched beside his porridge. He pushed it back and forth without eating, his eyes red from a night without sleep. Eloise tried to coax him with a new porcelain doll she had carried in her trunk, but the boy turned away, clutching the ragged cloth doll Clara had mended for him, holding it close to his chest, as though it were the only truth he trusted. Ethan watched his son with a heavy ache he could not name. He had told himself he needed to be practical, that honesty was the one thing he required above all else, yet the emptiness of the house gnawed at him. Clara's laughter no longer echoed off the walls, her gentle voice no longer read stories by lamplight, her soft footsteps no longer moved about the kitchen. The quiet hurt more than the storm ever had. When Daniel slipped out to the barn that afternoon, Ethan followed and found him curled in the hay. The boy's shoulders trembled, his face hidden against the straw. Ethan knelt beside him, brushing back his hair with a rough hand. "What is it, son?" he asked gently. Daniel turned his face slowly, his cheeks streaked with tears. "She lied," he whispered, his small voice breaking. Ethan's chest tightened. "Who lied?" "Pumpkin." Daniel clutched the rag doll tighter. "That lady in the pretty dress?" he said. "She says she is Eloise, but she is not the real Mama." Ethan's breath caught at the words. "What makes you think that?" he asked carefully. Daniel's eyes lifted, wide and fierce. "Because the real Mama stayed," he said. "She held me when I had bad dreams. She sang about stars when you were sad. She told me my drawings were magic. I prayed for her, and she came." Ethan could not answer. His throat closed with shame. He rose slowly and went back inside, his feet heavy on the steps. In Clara's small room he found the quilt folded neatly, the basin still filled with water untouched. He opened the drawer of the bedside table, and there it was, the worn leather journal she had kept tucked away. His hands trembled as he opened it. The ink slanted across the pages, each word written in her careful hand. "I never meant to lie," he read. "I only meant to survive." Page after page revealed her heart, her fear when she first arrived, the guilt that gnawed at her when he looked at her with kindness, The way Daniel's laughter had become her favorite sound. She wrote of planting violets by the porch, of reading by the fire, of loving them with every breath, though she carried a name that was not hers. By the time Ethan reached the final page, his vision blurred with tears. "I will leave if he asks," she had written, "but I hope he remembers that what I gave was real. All of it." He closed the book and pressed it against his chest, the truth slamming into him harder than any storm. She had never stolen a thing. She had only given, and he had cast her out. Without another thought, he strode to the stable, his boots striking the ground with urgency. He threw a saddle over his black gelding and swung into the seat, the reins tight in his hands. The storm had left the ground soaked and muddy, but he pressed the horse hard into the night, his voice calling Clara's name into the wind. The rain still fell, cold against his face, but he did not stop. Mile after mile he searched, the journal's words burning inside him like fire, the memory of her smile guiding him through the dark. The whistle of the morning train echoed through the valley, sharp and lonely against the mist that clung to the ground. Clara stood on the platform with her small carpet bag at her feet, the shawl around her shoulders still damp from the night before. She had said her goodbyes in silence, whispering them to the empty road as she walked, to the porch where Daniel had clutched her skirts, to the house where she had known both happiness and heartbreak. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she kept her back straight. She told herself she would not cry, not here, not where strangers might see her weakness. She lifted her chin and watched the steam rise from the waiting train, her heart heavy as stone. Behind her came the thunder of hooves. So sudden, she thought for a moment the storm had returned. She turned just as a black horse skidded to a halt at the edge of the platform, mud splattering as Ethan swung down. His coat was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his breath heavy from the hard ride. Clara froze, her hands clenching tight around the handle of her bag. Ethan's eyes found hers, and in them she saw no doubt, only a fierce clarity that made her knees weaken. "I was going to let you go," he said, his voice ragged but strong. "But then I realized, I do not want to be the man who watched you walk away." Clara's lips parted, but no sound came. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the delicate gold chain with the poppy pendant. It glinted in the morning light, as bright as the promise it carried. "I bought this before I knew your real name, before I understood anything," he said softly. "But I still meant it. I bought this for the woman who made my son believe in angels again." Tears welled hot in Clara's eyes as she pressed her hands to her mouth. "It was never about a name," Ethan continued. "It was about how you made us feel like home again. I do not care what name you wore when you stepped off that stagecoach. I care who you are when you smile at my boy, when you hum in the kitchen, when you look at the world as though it might still give you something kind." Her breath came quick and uneven, her heart pounding as she took one trembling step forward. "I did not think I deserved any of this," she whispered. Ethan's face softened, his lips lifting into a smile. "You deserve every bit of it." Then, with no hesitation, he lowered himself to one knee right there on the wooden platform, the chain gleaming in his hand. "Clara Hayes," he said, his voice steady now, "will you come home? Not as the bride sent by mistake, but as the woman I choose, the woman Daniel prays for, my wife." Clara's tears spilled freely, but her smile shone through them. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I will come home." She bent and let him fasten the chain around her neck once more, the pendant warm against her skin. When he rose, she fell into his arms, her bag forgotten, her heart no longer heavy but full. The train hissed behind them, its wheels ready to turn. But Clara knew she would not be leaving. She had already arrived at the only place she was meant to be. 2 days later, beneath the cottonwoods in bloom, Ethan and Clara were wed in a quiet ceremony. Daniel placed a crown of wildflowers on her head and called her Mama, with a voice full of pride. Clara answered with tears and laughter, her hand clasped in Ethan's as vows were spoken and the valley carried their words away on the wind. She had not come as the bride he ordered, but as the bride he was meant to find. And love had made all the difference. If this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to Western Love Legends. Give this tale a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We have many more journeys of love, grit, and hope on the wide-open frontier waiting for you. After all, even a cowboy knows the best way to keep warm on a cold night is with another story.